any kind of supplies. We make a donation to the library once a year. We've been trying to we have in the past donated to the legislative page fund. This year, they couldn't find any kids who wanted to serve as pages, so we haven't done that this year. We're about to have a website built for us. There are a couple of candidates here tonight I'd like to introduce you to. Suzanne Woodward, do you want to come and say a word?
Sure.
Come on up here.
Yeah. I will do so. Can you hear me? Yeah. Hi. First thing I want to say, I'm Woodard, and I get that all the time. It's not Woodward, it's Woodard. I don't mind it as much, but it really bothers my husband. So that's why I want to say that, just to point that out. Yeah, he's okay with it. I am a resident of Whidbey Island. I live in Clinton, and I am running in the 10th Legislative District, your neighbor, down here to the south. I'm running for the House seat that Norma Smith, the GOP incumbent, has it now, the position 1 seat in the House. And I am just getting my campaign up and started and running and going, and I wanted to say that I have come here to this meeting a couple times. You guys have great speakers here, and you have a great education for the community, and that's really great. My history is I'm a registered nurse. I worked at Providence Hospital in Everett for a million years. And I worked primarily in labor and delivery. I labored with women, and probably thousands of women in Island County, Snohomish County, Skagit County, and I delivered probably just as many babies, and sometimes more than just one at a time. So there you go. So, and those children are now getting to be older, and I worry about what they're going to have here in our world, so I want to work on that as well. So anyway, I don't want to keep the time because we've got a lot to do today, but I'd love to talk to any of you. If you want to come and speak to me and tell me what's on your mind, I want to listen. So thank you all.
Thank you, Suzanne. Woodard, not Woodward.
It's only to my husband.
And the other candidate is Jason Call. Would you like to come up as well?
I sure would. Hello, my name is Jason Call. I am running for Congress, Congressional District 2. I am challenging Rick Larson for his seat this year. He's been in office almost 20 years. I've been a constituent of his for that length of time, and I believe it's time for a change. I am a progressive Democrat. I stand for Medicare for all. I think we need a Green New Deal to protect our planet for the future. I am going to call Rick Larson out on the fact that he does not support Medicare for all or Green New Deal. I do not take any corporate cash. Rick Larson gets 75% of his funding from the corporations. I was a public high school teacher for 18 years, so I have been a union member for that long. Not a public school teacher right now, but I was a building rep for many, many years. I was elected to the board of the Marysville Education Association for 3 years, represented at the WA Representative Assembly for 4 years. And I have, since we're on labor tonight, I have an extensive labor platform, which includes, I'm going to bring it up here and say a couple things, a Workplace Democracy Act to make it easier to form unions, and such reforms as card check and require companies to negotiate a fair first contract. Repealing Taft-Hartley, a jobs guaranteed, federal jobs guaranteed, $20 minimum wage. I don't think $15 minimum wage in this economy goes far enough. Strengthening social security by removing the artificial cap. I think we need more worker representation on corporate boards. So if you look at my website, callforcongress.com, and that's F-O-R, not the number 4, you'll see a lot of reforms that I think we need to make in this country to make it far easier for people to unionize. I also want to say, since Ms. Woodard brought up that she was a nurse, that my campaign is in full support of the NCIU 1199 workers who are striking against Providence Swedish right now for better working conditions and better conditions for their patients. So I do hope you'll check out my website, callforcongress.com. I live in Marysville, and I represent the 44th Legislative District on the Washington State Democrats Central Committee, and I'm looking for endorsements from labor and endorsements from local Democratic Party. I'm going to be up for the 44th Legislative District endorsement vote this Thursday. I'm talking to Island County at the end of the month, and at this point I've visited all of the local party organizations in the district. So if anybody would like to talk to me, be happy to have a conversation. Appreciate it very much. Thank you.
C-A-O-L.
Okay.
And Scott McMullen just came in the door. These are all surprises to me. So come on up.
Good evening. My name is Scott McMullen, running in the 10th LD, position 1 again. Thanks to everybody that helped in the last campaign and supported me. We ended up with just under 48% of the vote, and feel very strongly that this time we can do it, getting started early. We've got some volunteers. We're up and running. My background is Norma Smith. We were trying to get out of there. Anyway, with my labor background, I started our local in the International Association of Firefighters. Put some money out of my own to have an attorney get us before the NLRB, and at that point we were able to vote to go IFF, and so I was very proud of that accomplishment. And then the body didn't want to pay dues to another organization, which was the Washington State Council of Firefighters, and I labored and lobbied very hard to get the guys to see the benefits of that, and so we did end up joining the Washington State Council of Firefighters, which I just got back from a 2-day seminar down there, and got to lobby down there, got to see Dave Paul, and we had a good time down there and met a lot of people. I've got some envelopes, I've got some handouts, and anything you can do, I would greatly appreciate it. I'll be here for questions, or if anybody's got a question now. Okay, I'll stick around. And
I have a question.
Okay.
What's your opinion on firearms?
Firearms. I own firearms, to be honest with you. It was handed down from my father. Has some hunting rifles, but as far as assault weapons and stuff like that, I don't see any reason for that to be in civilian hands. I think that I mean, my weapons are locked up. I believe strongly in that, and
Would you support a ban on semi-assault weapons?
yes, I would. Yes, I would. Any other questions? What I didn't go over was a little bit my political background. I was elected to and served 2 terms on the Mount Vernon City Council. Was chair of the Parks and Recreation Committee, and I'm also a member, 20-year member of the Kiwanis Club of Mount Vernon, and we had some funding for some playground equipment, but we didn't have the land, and I knew the city had a land there, a piece of property that we were looking at surplusing, and so anyway, I put together a deal where the Kiwanis Club would provide the equipment, the city would provide the lot, and so we got a beautiful 18th Street Kiwanis Park in Mount Vernon. It's actually a splash park. There's a ball field there. There's a boardwalk over some wetlands. We brought another park on, it's called Bonnie Ray Park. It was when I was chair. And also I worked on the flood wall / river walk. Went down Olympia, lobbied for the funding, and was able to secure that, and was real proud of that accomplishment. I'm married, 4 children still at home, and anyway, that's it. I'll stick around if you got any other questions. Thank you for your time.
Scott McMullen. And we have a campaign manager here, Marty Anamosa, who's campaign manager for Helen Price Johnson.
I feel like a piker compared to the candidates who are here. I'm campaign manager for Helen Price Johnson, who's running for state senate in the 10th legislative district to hopefully flip the seat that has been in Republican hands for the last 8 years, held by Barbara Bailey, and now Ron Mazzal was appointed recently to take the seat. Helen's an almost lifelong Whidbey Island resident. She served on the South Whidbey School Board for 8 years, followed by, she's in her 12th year as an Island County Commissioner, well respected. She and her husband have owned a small business on the island for a number of years, building contractor. Helen is, when I look at what people tell us about Helen, the things that keep coming up are experience, integrity, and leadership. And that is what we believe that Helen can bring to the 10th legislative district better, much better than the candidate she's going to be running against. She has the issues that are the kind of the focal point. The biggest issue that we keep hearing about in the 10th legislative district, and this is all areas of the 10th, is the lack of affordable housing for working people, for seniors, people who want to, move for any reason. Finding someplace to live is the big hurdle. Finding affordable housing for people who have regular jobs. South Whidbey is very tourist oriented, and people who are in what tends to be relatively lower wage jobs in the tourism industry, it's just impossible to find a place to live. The second issue that is really big for her is access to health care. In all the rural communities in the 10th, access to health care is a problem, both transportation-wise and the availability of specialties, practices. The availability of mental health, access to mental health care is even worse. There was a lot of money allocated to building some facilities in this area for mental health, but not much money allocated to hire the people needed to operate mental health facilities. And you can't have one without the other, and we need both. The other issue that has really become rather prominent in the last few weeks is education. Helen is a big believer that we need to support our community colleges and apprenticeship programs. Ron Mazzal recently voted against a bill that would have revamped the tax structure for the educational improvement something bill. Basically, the revamp would eliminate the tax on small businesses. You'd have to have $1 million in income before you were subject to the tax. The big companies are the ones that are asking for the community colleges to work with employers to produce the kind of workers that they need for their businesses. They are willing to pay this tax. If the new legislation eliminated the tax for small businesses and simplified the paperwork for large businesses. Ron Mazzal voted against that. It passed. The Democratic House and Senate passed it. But I think that's an indication of where we are with respect to preparing the people who come out, especially people who come out of high school, for the kind of jobs that we have in our communities. So anyway, I have some handouts in the back, including remittance envelopes. I have business cards with our website on them. We would love for you to follow us on social media, Helen Price Johnson for State Senate. Anytime you share one of our posts, it has a multiplier effect. Get acquainted with Helen with some of the paraphernalia we have back there. Thank you.
And the last announcement I want to make is something that's in the newsletter that I want to call your attention to. If you want to get involved in political work locally for local candidates, there's going to be an organizing meeting in Burlington. What day is that? February 22nd, Saturday, I think, from 2 to 4 at the Burlington Library. It's called Organizing Boot Camp. And it's put on by Washington State Democrats Coordinated Campaign with the field director. She'll be running it, Samantha Steele. So a few months ago, there was another field director here that I introduced you to, and she spoke. She has left the area, so Samantha, I think, is taking her place. It's the same title, field director for Washington State Coordinated Campaign. So if you want to help with, it's not just local candidates, it's presidential too. Go to that. It's in the newsletter. I forgot one more, Patty Santangelo. Forgot Patty.
I've got 3 quick ones, I hope. Real quick. The first one is there are flyers back there for the reading theater at Lincoln on this Saturday at 6:30 silent auction, 7:30 performance. There's no place like home. Mistruths and solutions about the homeless crisis in our communities. If you want to educate yourself, that's a good place to be. We call it a tribe. The League of Women Voters puts this out every year. It's called They Represent You. It's how to contact your elected officials in Skagit County. There's several of them back there. This year is the 100th anniversary of the League of Women Voters, February 14th. This is a booklet put out by the Spokane paper of the history of the League of Women Voters. And among other things, on the back it has the elections calendar. February 21st, the ballots for presidential primary begin arriving in mailboxes. They are due March 10th. It has been suggested that you wait until after Super Tuesday, March 3rd, before you send your ballot in to make sure your candidate is still viable. But make sure you do it soon after that, unless you drop it off at the post office or a ballot box. It can take up to a week to be postmarked. That was directly from the post office that told us that. So I've got copies of all of these back there.
Okay, so now I'll introduce our speaker, who's been patiently waiting, Trevor Smith. And when he speaks, please hold your questions until he's finished, and then we'll have a Q&A and comments too, not just questions, and I'll moderate that. Trevor lives in Bellingham. He has belonged to the Laborers Union for over 20 years while working as pipe layer and grade checker, building infrastructure and housing, and doing maintenance at all the northern refineries. In the union then, he was elected secretary, foreman, general foreman, site manager, organizer, and now he's business agent and political director for Local 292 of the Laborers Union. In the Democratic Party, he's chair of the 40th Legislative District Democrats. That's it. Trevor, you can either sit there or stand here.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me, or do I need to move the microphone?
Sure.
How's that? Okay. So, like she said, my name is Trevor Smith. I am a business agent and the political director for Labor's Local 292 and the chair of the 40th Democrats. I just want to say thank you for inviting me to do this. Sorry, every time I stand at a podium, I'm used to testifying in front of a county council or in front of or down in Olympia, and it's like 3 minutes, hurry up. I hope you guys have a lot of questions, because I also wrote only about 3 minutes worth of material. So one of the things I wanted to talk about was there's a long history of organized labor and labor working with the Democrats. And how did that all come about, right? When did that all start? Historically, the unions have always found more in common and had better results with Democratic electeds, Democratic majorities. This kind of started back during back in the 30s actually, during the New Deal. We were looking for labor standards as part of the New Deal, and we started working with Democrats like Robert Wagner, and we helped him craft the Fair Labor Standards Act. And this was one of the first things where unions came about in the mid-1800s, but it was kind of every person for themselves, every union for themselves, and it was a lot of bleeding on shop floors in order to win collective bargaining agreements. And with the Fair Labor Standards Act, a lot of that became codified and laws changed to where you had the right to organize, you had the right to demand conditions to put an end to bad workplaces or at least bad work sites. And they couldn't just shoot you for it, which they had done previously. It's really kind of a good thing. It was a big deal. We also, as unions, collectively put a lot of time and effort into helping to re-elect Franklin Delano Roosevelt in 1936. We saw the value of building a political relationship with a political party where it was something that worked for our members, it worked for us as organizations, and we wanted to work with the Democrats. So we started getting more involved. And it was really the first time that unions came together as a whole under AFL-CIOs, under different umbrella organizations, and started actually trying to make a change in federal politics, as opposed to just trying to change a mayor or a city council. And that actually worked pretty good. We didn't really get into politics, I guess. I had to actually go read a lot of this history. So I learned a lot of this when I was an apprentice, and that was 20 odd years ago. So we got more heavily involved into politics in 1943. And I'm going to come to a point here in a second where I talk about one of the things, or a couple of the things that we really pushed for as far as unions, what we wanted to see as far as legislation. The problem was that unions don't discriminate. We were looking to organize everybody. We still do. If you work for a living, you should have the right to a better job, a better, safer work environment, and living wages, benefits. Well, at the time, that ran up against the Dixiecrats, and they didn't necessarily like that. They certainly didn't like biracial organizing, job sites that were not exclusively white. And that became a problem. So they were looking for a way to limit what unions were doing, because the unions were starting to gain steam. They were starting to use members' money to financially back candidates, and that became a threat to corporations and corporate owners. So the Dixiecrats and the Republicans came together in 1949, 1947, and they passed this thing called the Taft-Hartley Act. Taft-Hartley Act severely limited what we could do and what we could organize for and how we could organize. It also brought us such really cool language as the right to work laws, which is just another way of breaking unions. So the unions, in kind of a knee-jerk, we kind of pulled back. We just got really into politics. It was going really well, and then they used our own tactics against us. They legislated against us. So we pulled back and we started looking internally. We started looking at our members and figuring what we could do for what we wanted to get accomplished. We started looking to collectively bargained agreements, fighting more for stuff at the bargaining table as opposed to pushing legislatively. So some of the things that we didn't get the same year that Taft-Hartley went through was a national health care plan, which was one of the things that the unions really wanted to see done as part of the post-World War II Reconstruction. We also wanted a higher minimum wage and the better ability to organize. So we started looking inwards, and that kind of maintained through the 50s, the 60s, and into the 70s. we still got involved in national politics, and not all that history is good, I'll be brutally honest. Unions made some mistakes, and that has since been remedied. Pretty much every union in the country, in one way, shape, or form, got stepped on by the federal government in the 70s, the 80s, and through the 90s. And any association with organized crime or anything like that was removed. My union itself, the laborers, we didn't come out of federal supervision until 2001. We hadn't had a problem since 1971, but we had federal agents in every single one of our local union elections and all of our national elections for 30 years. We didn't have a choice in this. That was part of the settlement agreement. If you still wanted to be a union, that was what you had to do. So that's what we did. We don't have any of that problem now. I'm very, very happy to stand up here and say that we hold fair, honest elections through our Constitution, and our members elect all of our officers. And we don't put up with having anybody else standing there telling us what to do, whether it's a company owner or the feds, to be honest. We're very happy with a democratic workplace and a democratic union. So, some of the things that, at least in recent history, say in the last 20, 25 years, unions have gotten back into politics. So we've started looking more at state elections and local elections versus so much on federal. I mean, obviously we still weigh in through a lot of the umbrella organizations like the AFL-CIO, the Building Trades Councils, the Central Labor Councils, and then all of our individual unions, our internationals, generally endorse a presidential candidate. But one of the things is that we've got a lot of studies that have shown that if unions organize internally and they get their memberships activated, and they get their membership to pay attention and get behind a single candidate, they can, on average, raise about 9 to 16 percentage points inside of union households versus non-union households for Democratic candidates. It doesn't always work. There's always somebody who doesn't want to go along with it, but it has been shown that unions have a large part to play in this. The other things that we generally do internally is that we push voter registration as hard as we can. We want every one of our members registered, and we want them to vote, and we want them to be involved in elections. So, since the New Deal era, the Labor-Democratic partnership profoundly reshaped the electoral landscape and remains strong as Democrats have lost a little bit of ground and union membership has declined. Right now, nationally, there's about 11% of all workplaces are unionized or organized, and part of that has to do with the fact that there are 27 right-to-work states. In those states, under right-to-work, you don't have to join a union. Members don't have to pay dues. As a matter of fact, in some states, they're actually barred from paying dues. They can't do automatic dues withdrawal or deduction out of their checks. They have to go down to a union hall, and they have to pay. If you're in Nevada, you can't even write a check. You have to pay cash. In some other states, you're barred. If you're a public employee, you're barred altogether from paying union dues. So you have to give to a charity that then gives it to the union. It's a long way around the mountain. But this is the way that the more right side of politics has found to try and get unions out of politics. So we found a way to fight back, and that's one of the things that, as far as the laborers go, especially locally, that we do so very, very well. We don't give a lot of money to local candidates. We give some contributions, but mostly what we do is we turn on our members. We'll walk doors, we'll hold rallies, we'll go wave signs, we'll do all that kind of stuff. And one of the things that we found is that by doing the internal organizing and going back to the way things were in the 1930s and in the 1940s, where everything for us starts with our members, and I think every union would agree with that. You can have somebody stand up in a union meeting and make all the pretty flowery speeches you want, but if the members aren't into it, it's not going to fly. So we spend a lot of time educating. One of the things that we're very proud of, most unions are proud of this, is that we have more politically aware and politically active people than just about any other organization that we do associate with and we try to work with. Our members get this generally. It's one of the things that that we push through our apprenticeship programs is getting involved, paying attention, the fact of why elections matter, why they should vote, why they that we're all still proud of. My grandfather and my father is still working. He has a good retirement. He just doesn't. I don't know. He won't retire. So I'm working on that. My grandfather retired from the state of Washington. Yeah, it's been really good for us, and I think that's one of the things that's missing from the overall union story is we don't necessarily tell the story of one of the reasons why we could go to college, my generation, Generation X, or even the millennials, is because our parents had good living wage jobs. They either paid for the kids to go to college or they found the resources for them to go, or supported them while they found the resources to go. But all of that stemmed from the living wage jobs. And that's the biggest thing about, as far as the building trades go, probably our number one priority is safety on the job. The second priority would be living wages and benefits, insurance, all of that kind of stuff. We never lost that dream or that goal of trying to pass a national health care act. It got kind of shot down in the post-World War II, but we've never given that up, and we've always supported that. Even though the last time that we had anything close to a national health care act was the ACA, we supported it even though we were the ones that took it on the chin. Unions got the belly button tax, the Cadillac tax. They came after our pensions. They came after our health care as the easiest way to try and convince us not to do this, but also because they saw it as an easy funding mechanism. So organized labor's kind of used to that. We get that, but it was still the right thing to do, and we still supported it. Having health care is more than just a fancy slogan. We've always believed in it, and we think everybody should have health insurance. And to be honest, we'd love to be out of the business. I'd love to never have to negotiate health care again. It would be great. You know, I mean, 9 times out of 10 when we go to the bargaining table, 2/3 of the economics that we talk about is supporting our health care. It's not going to the members. It's going to their benefit, yes, but it's not going to their money on their checks. It's just to support what they've already got. So it's great. So this is one of the cool things about me. I write pages and pages of stuff, and then I never actually follow it. So it makes it really hard to jump around. So one of the things that I love about organized labor is that we cover such a broad base. I mean, just here, just speaking to you guys today, you've got firefighters, school teachers, nurses, longshoremen. I mean, I'm a laborer. We all do different things, but all of us identify in the same way. We're all organized labor. All of us that have been up here at some point, we have either gone and talked to our local electeds or our state electeds or our federal electeds, and we've pushed for things that were good for our members. But the most important thing, and I think something that none of us have forgotten, is that we may have these big fancy titles. I may be a political director, and I may work for the Laborers International Union of North America, Local 292. Ultimately, I live here. My family lives here. So whatever happens here, whatever happens in these communities, it affects not just some nameless, faceless population. It affects us. It affects our kids. It affects, actually, luckily, soon, my wife and I will be grandparents. So it affects more than just one thing.
And we're not afraid that our grandkid isn't going to be able to support it because our son wants union to.
Yeah, actually, it was one of the proudest moments of my life was when a guy walked up, and he'd been dating my daughter for, I don't know, about 2 years. And he said, "I want to ask you a question." And I said, "No." "She's too young and you're too young, no." And he said, "Well, no." He said, "I do want to ask you that question." He said, "But I don't know what a real job is." He was working in a nursery. Him and my daughter both were working in a nursery. That's where they met. And they were making farm wages, state minimum wage, about $9 an hour, half living in our house and half living in his folks' place. And he said, you know, he's 19 years old. He said, I don't know what a real job is, and I don't know how to get one. So I steered him towards the building trades, and I said, I said, there's apprenticeships in all these different trades. Well, no matter what you want to do, figure out what it is that speaks to you. You want to be an electrician, equipment operator, you want to bend tin. If you want to be a longshoreman, you want to be, a firefighter, whatever it is you want to do, there's an apprenticeship for this, and you should look into that. And he said, well, what do you do? And I said, I'm not telling you that because there's no way you can't be on a job site with me. But he did. He actually joined the laborers, and he actually saw it all the way through, graduated, married my daughter. And he now has a career in front of him, strangely, working for the last company I worked for when I was still in the field. And doing very much the same job, which is really kind of creepy because I've stayed off of every one of his jobs because he's my son-in-law, and it's no, it's just not going to work well. But yeah, they own a house, they're having kids, they have health insurance, they know that they have a pension coming at the end of his working career and her working career. Well, his working career, he will have a pension that will probably be enough to keep them at least in the house that they are going to have paid off by the time that they retire. If we have anything to say about it, hopefully long before then. They have that kind of stability, and it's interesting watching them grow up versus the way that the rest of us grew up, because they have that kind of understanding. They understand that there's continuing education, that they aren't going to have to pay for it. They're not going to be completely phased out of a job because they didn't learn a new skill. They're going to have healthcare. They're going to have these huge debts for healthcare because they couldn't afford to care for themselves. Even pay for the birth of their child. That will all be covered by the insurance. And it's a real powerful thing, and it's something that we try to pass on to all the people around us. We try to pass on to our electeds as to why this matters to us. Sometimes this puts us at odds even with our own democratically elected folks. It doesn't matter. We will have that conversation. We don't always have to win. We just want to make sure that everybody knows where we're at and where we're coming from. So anyway, with that, I'd kind of like to stop rambling, if that's okay. Is there time for questions? Can we do questions?
Lots of time, we can go till 9 o'clock.
Perfect. I would really like to know what you guys think. Yes, sir.
I got a question for you. I see all the grimaces on everybody's faces every time those things pass overhead. We'll do something about that. But the other thing I want to say is I'm a board member of Holt, Washington. Were you aware of the I-1600 initiative that went around in 2018 to get single payer here in Washington State?
Yes.
Okay, we are going to be refiling that initiative in next month, actually.
Okay.
We obviously don't know what the initiative number is going to be. WholeWashington.org is the website, but we have a viable bill. It's been analyzed. It's been, I don't want to say approved, but it's the State Department of Revenue has said the funding mechanism is good. It's viable, and so we would really like to get single payer here in Washington State. The only exemption would be due to the ERISA laws that say employers can't offer their own. Barring that, everybody else would be in, and even those employers who do offer their own health care can opt into this system if they would prefer to go with our system rather than their own employee health care. But we would really love labor support in volunteering to get these petitions signed. As you know, the initiative process requires somewhere around 300,000 signatures. So I would like to talk to you about that, but for everybody else in the room, WholeWashington.org, we do have a single payer bill. And I also want to say that Bob Hasegawa, 11th District, had this bill in the Senate, and it was supported also by Karen Kaiser and I forget the other person. I want to say, no, I won't even say, but Karen Kaiser was supporting it also. It got blocked by Annette Cleveland of the 49th Legislative District, and nobody in the House would even pick this bill up. And I want to let everybody know that the two Democratic chairs of the health committees in the House and the Senate both take bags of money from health insurance industry, farm industry, and associated healthcare industries. And so they can block these things from coming to the floor. This bill did not even get a hearing because Annette Cleveland said, no, we're not going to do this. So I want to say that it's extremely important that you guys elect the right kind of Democrats, especially for labor causes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll bring the microphone to you. So yeah, raise your hand, I'll take you in order. I think it's on, let me know if it is not.
Okay, this is Andrea.
In those,
If you stand, they can hear you better.
in the states with the worker rights, what has been the effect on wages? I mean, what has been reverberation of what's happened because of that?
So the question is what has happened to wages in right to work states?
Yes.
So generally, wages are at least 30 to 50% lower. So the funny thing is that it's not just a wage thing. Safety on those in those states, at least for the building trades, is 40 to 45% lower. Workplace deaths are 9 times higher. So one of the things is when you defund people's salaries, right? Because our taxes that are taken from our payroll taxes, a portion of that goes to labor industries. It goes to all these different little pots, right, that pay for public services. So, like for instance, in Idaho, they don't really have L&I inspectors. So if you're running in a bad job site, and say you're working in the ground, and you technically by federal law, anytime you're 6 feet, well, 6 feet up, you have to be tied up. If you're 4 feet underground, you have to have benching and shoaling. And you have to have dewatering, and you have to have a plan for this. If there's nobody inspecting, then it's kind of on you. And as a company owner, cribbing and shoring is mostly rented, but it's really, really expensive because it has to be certified. So that's the general effect. But yes, the wages are lower. There's, I want to say, I'm guessing that this number is something like 30% fewer workers covered by some sort of company or unionized health insurance plan. There's the numbers just kind of go on and on and on. It's not just one thing where it lowers the money. It actually makes everything worse.
Okay, we got batteries in it now. Who's next?
I have a question, Corinne. Am I loud enough?
No.
I'm out of practice, sorry. Say your name first. Hi, Nancy Matthews. Thanks for coming down.
Sure.
My question, and you might have answered it, but I need some clarification around it. It has to do, I can't remember, several months ago, I saw something on television, and they were interviewing Nevada union workers?
Yep.
Service union.
Service union?
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks. About how they felt about universal health care.
Right.
And there seemed to be a great reluctance on their part to go into it. And I think you touched on this, it was the idea of, well, they're going to take away my health insurance, and I like my health insurance. And I think there are a lot of people out, not just union workers, but a lot of people who are afraid to have their health insurance taken away from them if we get Medicare for all or universal pay or not.
Right.
So the question I had is but I'm not sure, you touched on it? Is that true that people are reluctant, or some people are afraid of this?
Yep.
And then my next question is, how could they be persuaded to buy into it? Because I think that, personally, I think it's a good idea, but
We're right.
how do we persuade people to make that leap of faith?
Nope, I get that. Okay, so the first part of it, are people reluctant, especially those of us with well-funded healthcare trusts and well-funded insurance plans where we're not paying huge premiums or huge deductibles? Yes, we are. We're looking at it and we're wondering, well, we already have this and we already gave up 25 years worth of negotiating power to get this. Yes, we think it's the right thing to do, but we would like to know where that money's going to go. And we would like to know that we were going to get something at least as good as what we have now. So one of the difficult parts is that, so as far as the building trades go, I can only speak to the specific construction building trades. And my dad's a state employee, so I can talk a little bit about his health insurance. My insurance is really, really good. I pay $1,500 a year. That is my total deductible for my family. It doesn't matter if it's just me or me, my wife, and 44 kids. It doesn't matter, it's $1,500. Max out of pocket is $5,000 per year. It's really good insurance. So when we see this stuff, everything that we have seen has come about, except for with very few exceptions, has been either talking about broadly at a state level or even broader at a federal level. So there's nothing really attached to it as far as what is your deductible going to be, what services are going to be covered. So that engenders a lot of fear. So we need specifics. And if there was any sort of actual conversation with the unions specifically, that said, okay, this is where your health trust fund money is going to go, and this is what you're gonna get back for it, right? Because ultimately, those of us that go and negotiate or do any of this kind of stuff, we're responsible. I'm personally responsible to 1,400 members that go to my union meetings. I'd like to survive that. Going in there and telling them that we're going to take away their health care, that's not a survivable moment for me. Or my boss. Thankfully, he gets to do that, not me. So that would be the biggest thing, is the education side of it, and an actual conversation with specifics, which is really hard for any national candidate or even a state level candidate. So that's why we like to look at things like what Mr. Call was talking about, right? Because presumably this has some specifics in it that we can actually look at and do an apple to apples comparison.
And when people are talking about just the financial aspect of it, you know, wholewashington.org actually has a calculator on there, and you can compare. You could say, here are the coverages that I need, you know, and it will calculate how much, and you can compare with how much you're paying right now. And what people need to remember about Medicare for All and the whole Washington bill is there's no premiums, there's no deductibles, there's no copays. It's free at the point of service, and I know the Medicare for All bill, if we go for the one that Bernie has proposed in the Senate, and the one that Pramila has proposed is very, very similar. I think there will be a couple of tweaks to do to get them to match up, but $200 a month max on prescriptions. Or is it, no, I'm sorry, it's actually $200 annual max on prescriptions, you know. So I think what the single payer does is it removes a ton of, you know, when you remove the profit and you move a ton of the overhead, then that money then goes to paying the workers and hiring more doctors and more nurses and more support staffs, so you actually get more care rather than paying for CEOs who are making $35 million salaries, you know. So the pharmaceutical alone, the industry alone made almost $70 billion in profit last year. That money should be going to patients, and it should be going to healthcare workers.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Jason. So happy you came tonight. Okay, Valid's got a question or a comment.
Thank you very much for this good presentation. I appreciate it. My name is Valid, by the way. I'm an LD10 for this. If you don't mind, I was going to make a comment about the single healthcare system, but anyway, I will skip that. Would you care to comment on the outsourcing of jobs and the effects of the union membership and the wages over the last 20, 30, 40 years?
Sure. I can speak broadly to that. So as far as outsourcing, one of the great things about digging in the dirt and building buildings and building roads and bridges and stuff like that, they can't really outsource us. But it is something that we have seen. It is something that is deeply affected all of the factory jobs, dock workers. It's affected everything in this country, and that has had its own little trickle-down effect. When manufacturing slows down or leaves the country, everything stops being built, right? We no longer build warehouses, we no longer build more shipping ports, we no longer have tax revenue from companies and from individuals with good living wage jobs to pay for things like our transportation infrastructure. So it is a symptom of a larger problem, right? One of the things, as far as back to your question about where wages have been, stagnant would be the best explanation for that. 2008, when the recession came, didn't really come to Washington until, well, 2008 it started, 2009, 2010 was when we really started to feel it. So 2006, as far as our contract, we got a 2.25% raise that year. The 2008, we got a 0% raise. 2009, we got a 0%. 2010, we got a 0%. 2011, we got a 0%. Well, if y'all remember, even though there was all this recession, prices didn't actually go down. I mean, yard sales were great the first couple of years, but what people paid at the pump, what people paid for groceries, what you paid for rent, what you paid for power, what you paid for medicine, those didn't go down. But our wages didn't go up, and we were not unique in this. We were better than some, where we saw some of our brothers and sisters across the nation, actually their wages went backwards. The In order to put up with the fact that people were no longer working, then they started having to draw heavier off of the wages of the people who were still working. So those wages went backwards, plus negotiated contracts started taking money away from the wages to shore up healthcare, to shore up pensions, all this kind of stuff. So that was very, very difficult. So there's been a lot of push since about 2014, 2015 to try and make up for the ground that was lost during the recession, and our wages as far as the building trades goes, that's really undoable. I mean, if you took it and you said, well, the average rate of inflation is 3% per year, and that was roughly 5 years that we didn't get any sort of pay increases, but prices accelerated, you can't make up 15% in 1 year. So so what we do now is we're trying to negotiate for not losing ground, because 2 to 2.5% per year is a pretty good raise. That's pretty average, no matter what you're doing, no matter where you're at in the country. So getting a 3% or a 4% raise is great, and it has a ripple effect on all of our members, right? Because when they go to work and they just got a 4% raise, then yes, they start doing things like house repairs, sending the kid to the dentist for the orthodontic work that maybe isn't covered by insurance, or buying a new truck, or whatever it is that they've put off doing for the last 5 years that they now feel like they can catch up on. So that's good, but it's short-lived, because once again, we have to negotiate the next year, and it's, you know, if we fall under 3%, then we're technically losing ground. But yeah, stagnant would be the best answer to that. So.
Hi, I'm Claudia, and I appreciate what you said a little bit earlier about, I think the expression used was biracial, about how unions are integrated. So speaking from my
Hold it
own
close to your
experience-
mouth like you're gonna.
Okay, I can do that.
There you
Is that
go.
better? Okay.
It works that way, not
Okay,
the other
all
way.
right, got it. You'd think with radio I'd know better. So I'm a marine engineer. I'm an academy graduate. You know, I got a bachelor's degree. Not a whole lot of women do what I do. When I was looking for jobs my senior year at the academy and interviewing, none of the private companies hired me. And I remember one interviewer actually saying, did I know that I might be the only woman on the ship, as if I hadn't noticed for the past 4 years that I was usually the only woman in my class. So I ended up joining a union, Marine Engineers Beneficial Association, and because hiring is basically blind, there's a list of seniority, who's on the list, and you're just hiring for a position. So whoever's been out of work longest, who has the requirements for this job, gets the job. They get first dibs. So because of that, I got the chance to work in my field, and eventually I became a chief engineer, and I don't know, I guess I'm pretty good at it because, people let me know when jobs are coming up. But that's something that's not really talked about much. I've had opportunities, I believe, as a union member that I might not have had if I hadn't been. How do you suggest we get the word out on that? I mean, how do you suggest we educate people?
So this comes up when we're doing organizing a lot. Is not only from the company side, but from the employee side, is they want to know, well, do women have a fair shot? Well, see, that's one of the great things about what we do. Is that contractor calls us and tells us the skills that they need and how many of those people that they need. They don't get to tell us whether or not they get somebody who is a male over 6 foot tall or a female under 5'5". We dispatch based on skills, so that's the way this works. It's not a perfect system. The only way that we can purge our hiring hall rules by law is to specifically dispatch a woman to a job, because there are state regs for federally funded and state funded projects for 15% utilization for either women or minorities or disadvantaged of some variety, right? So the only way that we can go around everybody just goes out based on their skills is if we send more women and minorities. That is the way our system is built. But how do we get that out? Because I can say that all day long, but it still takes a real act of courage. And I've some of the best workers I know, and are some of my sisters that I've worked with in the field. You're a marine engineer, and you've been a chief engineer, and that is a hell of an accomplishment, and that is really, really good, and you should be very, very proud of that. And you earned that. There's no cheating around that. And it's the same with a lot of the women that I've worked with. They have actual skills, and so we try to address it through union meetings. We try to address it through organizing drives where we can speak to this. We'll bring some of the women that we work with out of the hall and have them tell that story. Because to be honest, it doesn't work. If I stand there and tell them that I guarantee you that you will have equal opportunity, I'm still a tall white guy standing there telling them they're going to have equal opportunity. They've heard this song before, right? So the best way we can do it is there's a couple of national organizations that work very heavily locally through the national building trades. We have the Women Builds America, we have Women Build the Nation. They do a lot of outreach where it is literally, they call it sister to sister outreach. And I believe that there's similar comparisons in just about any industry you would like to do. But it's one of those things that it is very difficult, because like I said, they've heard some guy tell them that before. So as far as getting the information out, all we can do is show them. Show them and educate them and tell them before it becomes a problem. And that's the tact we've tried to take with it, is, you know, we understand that words are words, but give it a shot. We want to show you that this will work. So, did that answer the question? Oh, thank you.
That was a beautiful segue, because I want to bring up words are words.
Okay.
My name is Wim Hoebermans. I grew up in Europe, and my accent is Dutch. And I want to share with you how a newspaper would put the headline in a newspaper about the negotiations with a company. In the Netherlands, you have unions just like here, and they can be called vakbonden, trade unions. Very, very almost literal translation. But when it gets to the newspaper on how the unions are represented, they are not called unions, they are called social partners. These social partners negotiate with companies. And they are seen as a partner, because together they make the company stronger, and of course the laborers. I think social partners is a way better word than organized labor. Just half an hour ago you said organized crime, you're just a word away. And words are words.
Yep.
So,
that's a good point.
Social partners is a great word. Great thing.
Actually, that's really good, and I actually really appreciate the fact that you pointed that out. And I really like the term social partners, because most companies do see us as the enemy. They think that we're there to steal their money and tell them how to run their companies, not try and provide a better trained workforce and make them more profitable.
In Europe, it's very common that the labor unions have a seat at the board of directors, have a strong say about how to make more profit.
Right. That would be awesome.
I'm glad you brought up words are just words. How many people here have heard of OSHA? How many people here know that it would take 139 years and its current manning and funding levels for OSHA inspectors to inspect every work site in the United States?
You should try chicken inspectors.
So the point is that OSHA and all the regulations are words on paper, and they mean nothing unless they're enforced. EPA has a 13 times higher budget than OSHA. Now, I love the birds and the bees and the fishies of the seas, but I want to be at least on the equal with them as a worker. So OSHA regulations don't get enforced because they don't get funded. They don't get funded because corporations contribute to who? They contribute to politicians that don't want those things to take place. So, you remember a few years ago, Colombia, the country of Colombia, being one of the worst labor and human rights abusers. And so they wanted to pass the U.S.-Colombia Free Trade Agreement, but there was a sticking point, and it was because of the lousy human and labor rights abuses. So President Obama sat down with the president of Colombia and passed the labor accord. Guess what? Colombia remains one of the worst places for a union member.
I had a question along the lines of what Lynn was saying too. And you do negotiate with companies and so on. And they view you as the enemy in many cases. Do you view them as the enemy? And what kind of approach do you take to try to get a balanced outcome that will support the company so the company can continue to survive? Because without the company, there wouldn't be any labor anyways. And I mean, it's a two-way street. And, you know, in the history, it seemed like a lot of the efforts on the part of unions was to get as much salary as they could, or if they couldn't, then defer it to retirements and so on, which General Motors accepted and put this huge burden on the future. And then now, you know, just recently they're paying for that. Everyone's paying for that. So could you talk to that?
Absolutely. So generally, whether you're organizing the first time or whether you're negotiating a contract. So for the building trades, we nominally negotiate our contracts with this thing called the Association of General Contractors. It's hilarious. So the association, I'm going to go a little bit off the path for a second. The Association of General Contractors exists nationally, and it is a union that companies pay into and pay dues, monthly dues, and that's who negotiates the contract on behalf of the employer. Funny thing is, they came from right-to-work states. Companies formed unions because it was to their benefit to negotiate with us collectively as opposed to individually with each contractor. So, a little funny piece of history. So generally, when we go talk to them, one of the things that we do is we do not approach them as the enemy, because you're 100% right. Without the contractors or without the company owners, our folks don't work. It has to be both ways, right? So we have to be able to demonstrate to them why there's a need, a reason, and an outcome for the wages that they're paying, right? So that's usually how we start out, is company A, here's, you're negotiating for all these contractors in this specific industry, say concrete or tunnel work or bridges or something like that, right? Here's overall what your completion rate is, here's what your general overage is, and especially on public works. In the state of Washington, we can see all this data because it is publicly available, because we have a really good Secretary of State system that posts all this stuff up there. So we can see what the bids are, we can see how many man hours were put into something, we can see whether or not, we can generally see whether or not there were cost overruns where they were, because they have to turn all that data over to the state of Washington, right? So we tend to base it mostly off of the prevailing wage side, right? But so we talk about skilled and trained workforce, and then we talk about, we generally talk about, these are the classes that we offer, and this is the level of training that we offer. So this is what these folks need in order to remain skilled and trained and the best at what they do, and to stay working for you guys doing the good job that they do. But they also need to be taken care of, right? And the contractors will generally push back with we're going to go broke, once we're bankrupt, then you guys don't have anywhere to work. We've heard this Labor's was founded April 13th of 1903, and I'm pretty sure we heard it 3 days before the actual charter was done. So we get that, but we generally approach it not from a hostile point of view. A prime example of somebody being pushed too far would be what the operators union did this last cycle. When they were negotiating their contract, they went and picketed. First time in forever that they did this. They picketed select contractors, and it was over wages. And they got good deals out of it. I'll go back to that in a second. But the biggest thing is that we try not to treat the company owners like they are the bad guys, or like they are something that we have to fight against. We have to convince them why this is a good deal. Because ultimately, in the state of Washington, for the laborers alone, we represent 12,000 working men and women that are trusting us to go in there and make this case for them. So that is what we do. And It actually works out fairly well, because we're negotiating for all of the union contractors in the state, and we're negotiating with all the weight of 12,000 people standing behind us. If they were all to walk out at the same time, it would be really bad, and nobody's projects would get done, no matter where it was at in the state of Washington. Funny part is, back to the Taft-Hartley Act, we are actually barred by law from picketing or striking. It's in our collective bargaining agreement. So it's in the preamble of our agreements. We cannot take those actions. We've several times waved one of our specific fingers in the air and said, no, we're gonna do this anyway. And we've done that. But there is a huge price to be paid federally if we do. We're gonna wind up in court, we're gonna lose. And that means that we are risking members' money, because ultimately every dollar inside of a union hall comes from a member. It is their money, and we're risking their money by doing that. And we're risking their position at the bargaining table, because when they do go back, you have to sit down with probably the same person that you just did that to, and you've got to work out some sort of a deal. I think that's one of the biggest things we learned from the 70s and the 80s is that it's really gratifying to go on strike. It's really gratifying to be big and bold and to feel like you are some sort of white knight of the working class and go out there and push people around and get the best deal for your folks that you can. And it would be, in some ways, I'm a big guy, it would be great if it was that way. It's not. We cannot do those things anymore. The laws have changed, the lay of the land has changed, and nobody's gonna put up with that. So we tend to go into it and be respectful, present why we do this, and show them why we are the best at what we do. And then if we still have to argue, we will argue. We will argue, but we will be civil about it. And that is the mandate from our members, it's a mandate from our internationals. So that's what we do. I wish it was different. I wish we could just walk up there and just be like, you have to give us this money because I'm really handsome and these guys are really good, right? It doesn't work that way. Companies, for some reason, really don't buy into that. I'm pretty sure it's the I'm not handsome part. But so we had to find another way to do it. So that's why we have to be respectful. And to be honest, we go through this a lot when we're organizing. We organize every day. It's one of the great things about working for a union is that you're talking to non-organized folks. So you have to be able to convince workers that you're not going to be that ham-handed person, not only with the company that they're probably working for that's paying their rent today, even if it's not sufficient, it's still giving them money, but also that you're not going to be that way with them. Because that was part of it, was back in the 70s and the 60s, there was no faith whatsoever, there was no trust. And that went both ways. Companies didn't trust us, and the members didn't trust us. And at that point, you're losing all the way around, you got to change. So that's what we did.
Well, you know,
Like,
Thank you. Lots of comments.
say your name,
But
Marshall.
Marshall Goldberg from Oak Harbor. Thanks to a presidential candidate named Andrew Yang, that most of us know in this room, who unfortunately withdrew from the presidential race today, I became aware of some of the issues related to the new economy. And I'm starting to read his book called The War on Normal People. And I would recommend that anybody who cares about labor, wages, the economy, looking forward should read it. Just getting into it, he says that half of the jobs, 48% of the jobs as we know it, are going to disappear, not in 2 or 3 decades, but probably within years. And if you want any proof of that, look how much is being automated. The threat of automation, artificial intelligence, and robotics is going to impact most of the jobs that are currently represented by good-paying union jobs. And so when he gets up on the national stage and talks about a $1,000 stipend or a salary or whatever you want to call it to every single human being in this country, it sounds wild and crazy and far out, almost the way Bernie sounded 4 years ago about some of his ideas. But it's based on his analysis. He's very smart, he believes in numbers, and we are in deep trouble. And I began to realize that we're focused on climate change, chaos, catastrophe, for good reason. But you know what? The next one right behind it, it's labor, it's the economy. And we talked in the past about exporting jobs. We all worried about manufacturing going overseas. And then we're not looking at what's happening right now in this country. Go into any store, all those automated, cashiers. Look how many cashier jobs are gone because the supermarkets have turned to automated whatevers. I could go on, but I won't. So my question to you is, as a prominent union member, and I support unions for all kinds of good reasons, how is labor going to respond to the real threat, which is coming down the pipe very soon?
So, that's actually a really good question. So, and this goes back to what got me back involved in politics about 6 years ago. One of the things that we realized as labor is that a lot of these conversations were being had, whether it was about climate change and the nature of jobs changing because of the climate, automation, outsourcing, offshoring, pick a term, right? But all these conversations were being had either in state houses, federal government offices, and they were being held in boardrooms. And the one thing that was being left out of this entire equation, those of us that actually work for a living, right? All of us, every single one of us. And we decided we would not do that. We weren't going to tolerate that, so we don't. So boardrooms are a little more difficult to get into and sit down and have a conversation with them, but we are doing our absolute best. We're finding a couple different ways that work, mostly by being loud and also by being polite and actually walking in. We've actually had some success with this with such places as Microsoft and Intel and other places like that, where we tried being polite and we actually were given time to actually talk to them. We didn't get a lot of good answers, but I mean, we did actually get inside there, which we were really surprised. And that's part of this. Kind of goes back to the whole politics of this whole thing, is that labor hasn't been being a part of this, and it hasn't been part of this conversation. Politically, we are seen either as useful volunteers or checkbooks.
Okay.
That's generally how we have been treated. We decided that half of that relationship was our fault because we tolerated it. We promoted that. We said, well, we'll write you a check, right? We'll endorse you a campaign. We'll write you a check. Well, money is not free speech. And I don't think a single one of us actually believes that it is. So we tried to figure out that we could write a $1 million check to Mickey Mouse and tell all our members at a union meeting, you should vote for Mickey Mouse. And I bet you not one of them votes for it. But so we had to figure out how to get them involved. And part of how we got them involved and how we continue to get them involved is by being in county council meetings, by being in city council meetings, by being down in Olympia, by being down in Washington, D.C. And that's part of this whole thing. There's no good magic pill or cure to automation or to the fact that the climate is changing and we have to transition with it. But we got to be a part of this conversation as far as how we transition with it. Like Rich was saying, the funding that has gone into things like OSHA and stuff like that, right? Every single one of those OSHA laws, just like every one of the EPA laws, is written in blood. OSHA laws are written in human blood. You usually have to have a minimum of 5 deaths before a law is even considered. The accident out here at Tesoro and Anacortes that killed those 7 operators, I knew every single one of those guys. I've been working with them for years. I mean, I guess we got lucky. There was 7 of them, so we passed the litmus test. There was more than 5, so a law would get passed. It's actually down in the State House. I actually know the governor just signed the PSM. I take that back. So, but it's taken years, and it takes somebody dying, right? Well, this is the thing that we will not tolerate anymore. We won't tolerate people dying for this kind of stuff, not without having a voice in this. So we are trying to be part of these conversations, because ultimately, when my dad left Idaho, right, he was in the timber industry. It wasn't exactly a growth industry. All the pun is intended in that one. So he found a different way, right? But he was one of 250 people that worked at Potlatch that did not. I mean, he found a way out. He went to work for the state of Washington. He only had to move all the way across the state to get another job. The rest of them didn't. They stayed there. They went to work for the Lucky Friday mine, or they went to work up in Spokane building bridges, or they did something else. They traveled. And that's because they weren't part of this conversation. So how do we fix that? And that's the only answer I got for you, sir, is that we got to be a part of that conversation so that we can try and figure out the best path forward. So. Bob has the mic. There it is.
I'm Bob Dolan, I live in Anacortes. Trevor, I have a question which goes to the concerns of us ordinary voters. In the election that's just concluded in New Hampshire, the candidate who most vociferously is devoted to Medicare for all and the elimination of private health plans, including union health plans, got close to 50% of the vote. And the next two candidates who are diametrically opposed to it, they got the next group of voters. So they're about equal, the two in second and third place and the winner. The question for you is, I understand you haven't taken any polls of union members or anything like that, but what do you believe, what influence do you believe their concern for their health plans will have on the votes of those union members if the leading vote getter is devoted to Medicare for all?
Wow, thanks for the easy question. No, actually, I really appreciate the question, actually. How much is it going to matter? It's going to matter significantly, but not in the way we want it to. Most of the, when you look at unions as a whole, right, we are 11%. That's organized workplaces, right? And that's state workers, that's city workers, that's construction, that's everything. The hard part about this is that probably only about maybe 50% of those are actually educated to the point where they would understand this conversation about healthcare and about asking for specifics and being able to see this and see the good that can come from it if it's done correctly, right? So a lot of them are going to be knee-jerk. I mean, and yes, we will do our own internal polls. We did it last time. When the Laborers International endorsed Hillary Clinton in the last race, they polled, so there's 580,000 laborers in North America. About 400,000 of them or so are in the United States. The International did polling, they hired a company. They made phone calls, they sent little mailers, we sent stuff from the locals. We did a lot of rallies and meetings asking people, who do you support, why do you support, and what do you want to see? And it worked. The majority of our members supported Clinton. They understood what we were saying. They understood what Hillary was saying, and they went for that. We also had a segment that still went for Bernie Sanders, right? Which we were okay with. We're okay with a Democrat. We weren't okay with Trump. And we're not okay with Trump because we understand what Trump is about. But 41% of our members did, and they still voted for him. And that is something that we cannot get away from. And the reason that they voted for him was because of race, because of religion, because of guns, and because of sexism. That is why they voted for him. Simple as that. And that is something that we have done a lot of work since that election, directly addressing those in the union hall at meetings. So one of the things that we do specifically as far as the laborers is we do this program called VOC, Volunteer Organizing in Construction. We invite all the members in the local to come to these meetings. And we actually have a fairly decent turnout. 1,400 members, we'll get, if we hold 3 meetings in a month, we'll get a couple hundred maybe, right? And that's actually pretty good. And we will directly ask these questions. We did this last month. Stood up, directly asked a question. Who voted for Trump? Nobody wanted to raise their hand. Right? I'm standing in the union hall. And I told him, I said, this isn't about guilt, this isn't about anything. This is about, I just want to know why you voted for him. And one guy stood up, and I've known this guy 20 years. I mean, I've known him since I was an apprentice, right? He was one of my journeymen. And he says, I'm not going to answer that because it's politically sensitive. I'm like, what do you mean by this guy's not politically sensitive. He never has been. And so what do you mean by politically sensitive? He said, I don't want to say it because it's going to sound bad if I say it out loud. Then same as little kids. Why did you do it? If it sounded bad, why did you do it? Well, I just wanted to do it. That's not a good enough reason. Explain to me. And I mean, we go back and forth. We'll have these arguments, and we'll do them inside of our own houses, and we'll try and better understand what it is that is causing the fear, that causes the knee-jerk reaction for people to vote for outlandish candidates that, as far as organized labor go, are just about as worse as you can get, right? And trying to persuade our memberships to vote more for their communities, more for their unions, more for their jobs, and less out of fear. you know, one of the questions that was asked earlier was about somebody owning guns, right? About a candidate owning guns. I own guns. I grew up with guns. I own lots of guns. They're all locked up. I believe in safes. I mean, I raised my child in my house. I was not wanted to be put in a position of having to come home to find my child had grabbed a gun and done something bad. And this came up in a completely different context a couple of days ago, is that, so strangely, those of us that work in refineries, that work in schools, that work at Boeing, that do even most DOT jobs or federal highway jobs, we have to go through background checks. I carry in my wallet to this day, I carry a transportation worker identification card. It costs me $139 every 5 years to go have a background check that covers all of Europe, all of the United States. It's the alphabet soup of intelligence agencies are given my fingerprints, my retinal scan, my facial recognition, all my biometrics, and my signature, and my credit card number, and they run this check. So I'm not scared of a background check, and I don't understand why any of us should be. I have to have one to go to work. There's hundreds of us that have to have these things to go to work. And it's kind of a good thing. I mean, especially when it comes to building schools, you'd kind of like to know who's actually working on that school while the kids are there. So it's one of the things I struggle with sometimes, even with my own members, because guns always come up. You know, well, what about my AK, or what about my AR, or what about my, whatever it is. We have to have these conversations because these are the things that they actually say. And the only thing I can say is that I come from a family of hunters, and if you need 30 rounds, go to the grocery store because you're really bad at this. But that's not popular, right? I mean, and that's not, and it's funny. It's funny in this context, but if you say that to a lot of people, you're just gonna get a bunch of angry people. So we try and address it the other way, which is, if you didn't have a job for a year, how good would that rifle be? Could you afford to shoot it? Could you shoot enough deer to feed your family? Could you figure out a way to make that work? I mean, highway banditry is only going to last for so long. And if you think you're going to defend yourself from the government, I mean,
well, that's the real reason.
You know, it's funny because I actually have a family member that said that. Well, I'm defending myself from an unjust government. Well, you have an unjust government right now, so get after it. But also, I don't care what your rifle is. You're not taking down a drone. We've proven that over and over and over again for the last 12 years that, you know, you can shoot a gun all you want, but you're never going to defend against something that somebody pushes a button from 12,000 miles away. So, anyway, that's really off the target. So, I think the mic's fine. I want to specifically address Tennessee and the Volkswagen thing. So a lot of stuff that, I'm sorry, I'm not talking to the mic again. One of the things that was not widely reported is that, so it's a right to work state, so you don't have a lot of the normal union protections, right? You also don't have a strong Department of Labor in those states or anybody to investigate it. So when the governor of your state comes into your plant while you're voting and says that if you guys all vote for the union, this plant will go away. And we're going to make sure. So you have somebody in authority, probably somebody you voted for to begin with, telling you if you take this step, you're all going to be out of a job. It doesn't matter what they promise you, the union can't protect you. The plant is going to go. And then they're putting up billboards with Jim Crow-esque threats towards union members, right? So now you have to make a choice. Are you going to make rent at the end of the month? You're going to feed your family with the job that you currently have? Or are you going to vote for the union, take the chance? And I mean, it was really, really ugly with the UAW. And it was really, really ugly what politics did to people who were very uneducated. I'm trying to find all my polite words here. And that's really what this comes down to is education. They don't know. We're never, I mean, you're absolutely right that just as many jobs have fled to right to work states, which is funny because when the UAW was the predominant union in this country, and every car was made, General Motors, Chrysler, didn't really matter who it was, until Datsun started being shipped in here, was made under a union contract. Have cars gotten cheaper since then? Because wages certainly have gone down since then. So the thing is that the price of a car has very little to do with the price of labor. It has to do with what the market will bear. It's the same as your power bill. Your power bill is not based off the price of power, it's based off of the value of the company. And that's the way this works. So we have to educate people that they have to find their inner spirit, or their inner spine, whichever way, and that they have to figure out how they're going to weather the threats and the intimidation from one side of the political spectrum and from companies, and do what is ultimately in their and their children's best interest. It's funny because going back to the whole climate thing, it's a very similar thing. We have to figure out how for people to be able to find the courage to do the right thing. And part of that is by addressing their concerns and bringing everybody to the table. Because if we don't, then they'll just continue to pit us all against each other. And that was what happened in Tennessee and in Alabama, and in one of the plants in California, actually, when they tried to organize, is that they just used fear to pit one side of the working class against the other. It's an age-old tactic, and I really, once again, wish I had a really strong answer for how to fix it. Education is the only way I can think of it. So.
One more question, Andrew. How strong is the Blue-Green Alliance? Usually the environmentalists and the labor have been at odds. So can you talk a little bit about the cooperation or lack of it, or wherever you're going with it?
Sure. So Blue-Green is actually, it's a great idea, and it's been variously in different locations, whether it's Seattle or up north or even down south along the Columbia River. It's been relatively strong and it's been relatively good. The problem is, or that has come, is when one side tends to run away. When locally we've had some issues where with labor where we've tried to address certain aspects of issues of legislation and stuff like that through the Blue-Green Alliance, we've been told that we are funny-duddies, or we're not willing to move forward, we're not progressive, we're not whatever. And they still move forward with their legislation like we're not part of it, like we're not part of an alliance, and that is difficult. We will always, and this includes both sides. So me personally, I've been on the Blue-Green Alliance, I've sat on a couple of different boards, I've sat on a couple of different, lots and lots of meetings. I've worked with most of the groups. Everybody is coming from a lot of the same places. We have the same objectives. It's just a matter of how we get there. That is the issue. And some of it is competing agendas. Environmental will always prioritize environmental. Labor will always prioritize working people. These are facts. We wouldn't be in the positions that we are in if we did anything else. So figuring out a way to get together, to work together, to be able to do this, it's an ever-evolving relationship, and it's not always going to be good. So we just keep working at it.
Can I add one comment to that? Corporations will prioritize neither. So.
I want to touch on one thing that you talked about.
Could you say your name, please?
Rich Austin, retired longshoreman. And part of this has to do with a little soul searching. Not all the people who voted for Trump were misogynistic, racist, xenophobes. They weren't that. What they were is they were people with an angst. They saw shuttered plants and massive unemployment in the communities thanks to free trade agreements that have cost this nation millions of good-paying jobs. You know that we lost 50,000 of our best in Vietnam. And right now, what's being produced in Vietnam? The textile that used to be made in South Carolina.
Right.
It's a horrible thing that's happening. So we should have seen the handwriting on the wall. Remember Brexit? The majority of the people who voted for Brexit were the miners and the shipyard workers from the north who Thatcher put out of work. Who started the free trade agreement where U.S. companies began running off her brother, Ronald Reagan. And what we're doing, we saw a demagogue come along and say to these people in Wisconsin and Ohio and Pennsylvania, oh, I'll bring those jobs back. And they said, finally, somebody's listening to us. Finally, somebody's listening to us. So get back to the whole environmental thing. We all want clean air. Nobody in this room loves their grandkids any more than I love mine. We get skin in the game, though. Our jobs are at stake. And the way to get through that is just transition. It's the only way to do it. That means if I lose my job in an oil field on Friday, on Monday I start another job or training someplace. Can't make me a promise 10 years down the line, because that hasn't worked. It's been a big lie. Partnership Retraining Act, big lie. So, labor is not intransigent on the environmental issue. We say, however, we don't want to endure 10 years of unemployment to join us on this issue. There's a better way to do it that will produce all winners and no losers. And I think we have to do that. So, the long and the short of it is this, and you started off, and I loved when you said this. Labor, and even none of us in this room, are just volunteers and check writers. We have a representation government, representational form of government. We're supposed to be telling them what to do. We don't like free trade agreements. Well, we got them. We didn't have anything to say about it, did we? They just shoved it down our throats. And millions of jobs disappeared as a result of that. Along came a demagogue. I'll promise you some more jobs. Talks about the economy. There's 140 million people in this country that are either poverty level or near poverty. That's how good the economy is. So, thank you.
Good points. The other part of this that's difficult is that both Andrea and Rich are 100% right. With blue-green, there's always going to be competing agendas, and the hard part specifically around here, specifically, whether you're talking about Skagit County, Whatcom County, Snohomish County, is that when I was a kid, when we first came over here the first couple of times from Idaho, it's funny, it looked a lot like home. There were mills everywhere. So you're looking at guys my dad's age who are still working, and you're telling them that they have to leave their industries. Because those that did get retrained went to work trying to find an apples-to-apples comparison for wages and benefits. You can't replace a mill job or a refinery job with Macy's or Subway or Starbucks, right? We're talking living wages. We're talking careers with benefits. Now you're telling these guys, and this is where we run into the rub with the blue-green. You're now telling the same guys and their kids who watch their parents go through this, that they once again have to leave their industry with no assurances and nowhere to go. There's nowhere that they can look and say, I'm going to make the same wages that support my family and make my house payment doing this here. I will have to either leave the country, leave the state, at least leave the county, right? And that is where people start getting their head up. They don't want to move on things, and it becomes this fight. So that is the conversations that we need to keep having, that we're trying to figure out. How do we do, like Rich said, a just transition, apples to apples? And we can do this. We have to be involved in this as far as labor, but we also have to be involved in this as far as politicians, because politicians are what's going to pass the laws that's going to make this work. But then they have to stick to it too, and that means that they need the voters, which means they need labor, which means that they need the parties, right? So because they have to be held accountable, but they also have to have the support to hang on to their values when it gets difficult, and it will. A prime example of this, Virginia just had a sweeping blue election. One of the promises from all of the Democrats in Virginia was a repeal of right to work. Came up for a vote, they threw it down. And the reason why was because the CEOs, the party commissioned a study really quick, and the state, right, to figure out what the cost increase for construction was going to be for the state of Virginia. So they pulled 11 company heads and said, how much are your wages going to go up if you all have to be union? They said, 50%. So they went back to the legislature that day and said, well, it's going to raise the price of roads, bridges, services, all that kind of stuff by 50%. And they, shit, we can't do that. Sorry. But they said, we can't do that, so they voted it down. So now you have organized labor that turned out, worked their tails off to get these folks elected, and they're now looking at it and going, why did we do this, right? So now we'll have to go back, and we will have to start over, and we'll have to rebuild these relationships, and we will have to rebuild and figure out how to support those Democrats that will stand up, will do the right thing, right? And to give them the support they need to do the will. And then we're gonna have to also go to our members and have these long conversations about okay, so they took a bad vote. It happens, it's politics, right? So let's figure out how we do this. And that is a much longer conversation. It's almost easier to heal a rift with an elected who took a bad vote than it is to heal it with the members or with even the voting public when they feel that they've lost faith. So, Mr. Cole.
Well, first of all, I guarantee you that my good friend Lee Carter, who is a member of the Virginia House of Delegates, voted for repealing right to work. Second thing is, if we can get money out of politics, we need to understand that it is the corporations who are funding these politicians who are essentially bribing them to vote for profit and not for the environmental causes, to tackle, I'll be honest with you, the timber industry here in Washington, our forests here in Washington are vital to the healing of the planet. We have got to stop cutting trees down. Why aren't we planting hemp fields and transitioning those workers to working in hemp fields where we have, hemp is essentially a renewable plant, a nitrogen fixer, and all of the fantastic things that come with hemp production. It is Weyerhaeuser that is resisting that. It is the companies that are staying to profit, off of our labor and the destruction of the environment. We have got to change our mindset because there doesn't need to be conflict between labor and environment. And just transition is absolutely vital and is written into the Green New Deal. So we can do this if we can get money out of politics. It's one of the reasons I'm running a no corporate tax campaign. So, you want to talk about who's voting for these trade deals. A lot of Democrats are voting for these trade deals, and they are bad for labor. We can do better. I mean, we can do better than this, but not unless we have some people in office who are gonna, stand for campaign finance reform, make sure that we have publicly funded elections, and so on.
I actually agree. And it's something that we're all going
Is
to
that a
have to.
surprise? Are you surprised to be agreeing with me?
No,
Okay.
absolutely not. Actually, because I've been to your website, I've read your stuff. It's one of those things about being a chair in the 40th, is you try not to get caught flat-footed. It happens to me all the time. But no, because I've actually read most of your stuff. I am not surprised. But one of the things is this has to be a conversation all the way around the ball, right? Just like you were saying. So you're right, we should be growing hemp. We should also be using hemp and beef tallow to make alternative fuels.
Absolutely.
But that just got shut down by environment.
Well, okay, no, I agree. I mean, there are transitions through that, but, the reality is we have to eliminate carbon output from the environment. So there can be a sliding scale of how that happens, but unless we get our environmental crisis solved, and this is another thing, the alternative, Washington is ripe for building infrastructure for new energy. We have more coastline in the 2nd Congressional District than almost anywhere else in the country. We can build tidal energy generators. We're sitting here on the Ring of Fire. We can build geothermal plants to produce that energy. I've got solar panels on the roof of my house that were built in my hometown of Marysville. We can have those industries here and have workers be transitioned to those industries here. But we also have to go for this long-term goal of completely reducing carbon emissions. So I understand where the environmentalists are coming from with that. There are other ways around it. It still requires getting money out of politics.
Oh, absolutely.
So what are the wages per hour at the factory where they made your solar panels?
They closed down. Factory closed down.
Ouch.
Yeah.
And I 100% agree that we need to get money out of politics. Like I said from the very beginning. I mean, it's a democratic plank in most places. I mean, I think it's something that we all actually believe. Money is not free speech, and getting money out of politics is the only way that we're going to have fair elections, right? I don't think anybody disagrees with that. I mean, I don't know about you guys. I got about $11 in my pocket. I'm not buying many votes with $11. So anyway. I really appreciate you guys' time, and actually I really appreciate the conversation. I mean, I didn't write all that much stuff, but I don't learn by just reading stuff and talking. I would much rather hear what you guys have to say, and I would rather listen and then respond to it, because I learned something new, because you guys ask questions, and I think of things, and I think of things in new ways. So I really appreciate it. I really appreciate you guys taking the time to come out.
Let's thank our
Unless they change the restaurants, I have to figure with somebody.
Now, we give Zane $45 as he spends it out for him. So I'm gonna give you
Saturday in the lake.
I'll write it down.
Passed on. Somewhere, yeah.
That's a good idea.
Where's the other microphone?
They don't have any skin in it. What are they doing?
We've had it, I'm already good at it.
We all do. We all do. What job are they getting? What do you do? What provisions were they going to
I'll just set those out.
Larry Brown.
Really great.
So good, thank you.
Sorry to see you again. Thursday, you're going to be over at Richard Rossman. I only live a couple blocks.
Oh, I think you got
Oh, really? Point that out.